Welcome to the Purple Political Breakdown. How's it going? How's your day been? And we are back at it again for the podcast to talk about an interesting question on this Monday. Who had the better foreign policy, Donald Trump or Joe Biden? Now, this is another kind of not episode, but another part to my long series that I'm doing, breaking down Joe Biden and Donald Trump. These are the two candidates we're going to have to deal with. They both have been president, Joe Biden currently, Donald Trump prior, and they had interesting reigns respectively. Now, I went down through the economics of Donald Trump and Joe Biden. From the information that I saw, it seemed to me that Joe Biden did better, but at the very least, you can argue for both sides that COVID definitely didn't give you the full picture of their capabilities, right? Whereas foreign policies for both of them is definitely more determined based off your values, whether you're more of a isolationist versus someone who wants to be more active in terms of international relations. So I'm going to dive into that, of course. Let me know your answer at the end of the podcast episode. And before we kind of dive into that, make sure you guys like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Rate it 5 stars for the podcast and share it to all your friends. Our motto here is political solutions without political bias. And I just want to give you information that is, for the most part, even keeled. I will let you know my personal opinion, but I don't want political bias to taint you in any way. I am in the middle. I go by things based off my own moral system, and that is important when it comes to a conversation. Don't get ideologically captured to the point where you're going against your own belief system just to agree with the candidate. I think that doesn't really bode anybody well, perfectly honest. So we're going to dive into our first segment, but before we do that, here's a quick promo.
Pod Nation TV has you beamed up with Out of This World award-winning podcast found exclusively on Pod Nation TV. Download Pod Nation TV for Roku and Fire TV. Pod Nation TV, Out of This World.
Make sure you guys check out Pod Nation TV. You can check me out on the Roku app to listen and watch this full podcast episode. So let's start off with our segment, Deeper, of course.
Deep or Deeper.
A sub-segment where I go into a question to kind of get our brains running a little bit before we dive into the main topic. Now, the question I have for you is, how will technology allow for the elites to become more superior? The reason why I'm asking this question is I think it's important to consider that technology and tools are great, right? They make life easier, they make life more efficient, but we do have to recognize, especially moving forward with our capitalist system, and I'm a big fan of capitalism, keep you in mind, but the problem tends to lie when resources can be consolidated to one side. Like, for example, let me give you some examples, right? Let's say there's a sports athlete. That athlete is trying to make it to the pros, whether it's the NBA or the NFL. That pro athlete has a child, or let's just say he is a child. Now, the resources that child's going to give is very dependent on their situation. More than likely, if you have a lot of funding, you can give them the best physical training. You can put them in certain camps and give them certain medicine, and they will have a better advantage to succeed versus someone who doesn't have all these things. Let's talk a lot more hypothetically. Like, what if we hypothetically create a serum to increase the amount of cell replication, or at the very least decrease the amount of cell deterioration, making our lives, making us either look younger or being able to live longer lives. The people who's going to consolidate those resources are the elite. They're going to be able to afford it because these things won't be cheap, right? Let's just say something that is let's just say a car that allows you to Basically self-drive. We have self-driving cars now, but having a car that can self-drive is something that's going to be very expensive. Only the rich can have it, and they can use it for a lot of different scenarios, right? The reason why I put all this out there is not to kind of say that, oh, the rich people get the nice stuff. It's more so, is it fair if the rich people get all the resources to make your life easier? Ultimately, if they keep on getting advantages to make their life better, make their life more efficient, and then grow from that advantage, then you're increasing the gap. And that kind of pictures our current society. That is the reason why the middle class is shrinking as much as it is, because the rich are getting richer by utilizing their resources to make their life better and more efficient so they can grow using that time that they're saving or the efficiency that they're garnering, as well as people who are poor don't have the resources and they're kind of just stuck where they are. So the rich is like increasing the gap, and the poor are just staying here, and it's not really closing at all. That's why the middle class is shrinking so much. So that is a big problem from that I see, and how we kind of navigate that. It would have to be a governmental body being able to give resources to the people so that allows them the opportunity to be on par. That is just going to have to be stuff like certain regulations or taxes, so we can ensure that the people on the top can't consolidate the resources. So that's something I feel like people aren't really talking about. And the more and more we are creating technology or creating medicine that is supposed to make us better human beings, it keeps on making me think that who are going to be the people who has access to this, right? Who's going to have access to the serum that makes you live longer or age less? Who's going to have access to the cure for cancer, right? It's not a big conspiracy. It's just a reality that the people who have all the money are going to use those resources for themselves so they can grow even more. So, what type of regulations, what type of taxes, what ways we can ensure that the people on the lower end of the spectrum have the proper opportunity is an interesting question to consider. But that is all I got for my deeper segment. We're going to dive into the main topic. Before we do that, make sure you guys check out Podpage so you can have your own podcast website as well.
Do you want a great website like this? This is my podcast website where I direct the audience to come to, watch the content, listen to the content, read the blogs, and much more. If you want to have your own customizable podcast website, then join my affiliate link in my description to sign up for something called Podpage, and they can help you customize an easy podcast website for your personal podcast. Sign up to get a discount now. Again, use the link in my description to join Podpage now.
Now, my Podpage link, affiliate link, will be in my description. If you want to create your own podcast website, make sure to use it when you do. So now let's kind of dive into the question I asked at the beginning of the podcast episode. Who had better foreign policies, Donald Trump or Joe Biden? Now, this is the information that I found, and I was able to kind of consolidate, and I'm going to read this off for you guys, and you guys can come up with your own opinions, of course. First thing, let's start off with Donald Trump. Trump's foreign policy initiatives during his presidency were driven by his desire to prioritize American interests in trade, borders, foreign policy, and national defense. In 2016, he campaigned on promises to address job losses attributed to China's WTO membership, threatening tariffs on Chinese products and tax penalties on offshore American companies. Upon taking office in 2017, Trump withdrew from the Trans-Pacific Partnership and advocated for bilateral trade agreements. He authorized a limited missile strike on a Syrian airbase in response to chemical attacks, withdrew from the United States-Korea Free Trade Agreement, and confronted North Korea, asserting U.S. willingness to act if China didn't address the situation. He also made significant international trips, withdrew the U.S. from the Paris Agreement on climate change, and recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital. In 2018, Trump proposed the establishment of a space force, moved the U.S. Embassy in Israel to Jerusalem, withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal, and held an historic meeting with North Korea leader Kim Jong-un. He also announced the withdrawal of troops from Syria and Afghanistan. In 2019, Trump continued efforts to combat ISIS, engaged in a trade war with China, withdrew troops from Kurdish-controlled Syria, and negotiated Phase 1 trade deal with China. He also withdrew funding from the World Health Organization amidst the COVID-19 pandemic and signed the Doha Agreement with the Taliban. In 2020, Trump brokered diplomatic and economic agreements between Israel and Muslim nations known as the Abraham Accords. He facilitated peace talks between Serbia and Kosovo and encouraged the normalization of relations between Serbia and Kosovo. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly. So those are all the things that Donald Trump did that I found. Now I'm going to kind of dive into Joe Biden before I kind of give my personal opinion on both. As for Joe Biden, the forward policy of the Joe Biden administration emphasizes the repair of the United States alliances, which Biden argues were damaged during the Trump administration. The administration's goal is to restore the United States to a position of trusted leadership among global democracies in order to address challenges posed by Russia and China. Both Biden and Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin has repeatedly emphasized that no other world power should be able to surpass the United States, either militarily or economically. Biden's foreign policy has been described as having ideological underpinnings in mid-20th century liberal internationalism, American exceptionalism, and pragmatism. Under the Biden administration, U.S.-Brazil relations have shifted, with initial challenges stemming from ideological differences between President Biden and former Brazilian President Bolsonaro, who had close ties with Donald Trump. Despite differences, both Biden and Bolsonaro expressed willingness to collaborate on climate change. With the election of Brazil's left-wing President Da Silva, a renewed emphasis on dialogue emerged, particularly on environmental issues like combating deforestation. However, differences exist, notably on China and the Ukraine conflict. U.S.-Canada relations have seen discussions on various issues, including COVID-19, climate change, and indigenous matters. Biden's Buy America campaign and decisions like canceling the Keystone Pipeline have caused economic tensions with Canada. In Haiti, Biden condemned President Moïse's assassination and deployed troops to guard the embassy. The administration has maintained support for Nicaraguan civil society against Ortega's government and expressed concerns about human rights violations. Similarly, efforts have been focused on addressing challenges in the Northern Triangle countries with a pledge of $4 billion for development. Regarding Cuba, and I think you're going to notice a pattern, there's a lot more in-depth stuff regarding Biden versus Donald Trump from what I was able to personally find. Regarding Cuba, the Biden administration has maintained sanctions despite campaign promises to lift restrictions, but has also sanctioned officials for human rights abuses and promised to enhance support for Cuban dissidents. Some sanctions were lifted in 2022. U.S.-Mexico relations have focused on regional migration, border issues, and reversing Trump-era policies. In Peru, Biden's support for President Boluarte has drawn criticism for her government's authoritarian tendencies. In Venezuela, Biden has retained a hardline approach, recognizing Juan Guaido as the legitimate president and not negotiating directly with Maduro. However, there's openness to easing sanctions if Maduro engages seriously with the opposition. Temporary protected status was granted to Venezuelans in the U.S. due to the humanitarian crisis. The European Union's relationship with the United States under the Biden administration has seen various dynamics. Initially, concerns arose over the EU-China Comprehensive Agreement on Investment, which some analysts believe could strain relations with the U.S. However, President Biden emphasized the importance of consultation on issues like China. Despite occasional disagreements, Biden focused on bolstering transatlantic relations through NATO and EU coordination on key global issues such as Iran, China, Russia, climate change, and the COVID-19 pandemic. In particular, Biden aimed to repair strained relationship with European allies and advocated for multilateralism to strengthen the transatlantic alliance. However, tensions emerged over the Chips and Science Act, which included measures seen as protectionist by EU member states. Nevertheless, negotiations continued on critical minerals, stockpile deals, and reforms to green industrial policies. Regarding individual EU member states, notable developments include strained relations with France following the AUKUS AUKUS Security Pact, efforts to strengthen ties with Germany, and support for Greece and Cyprus in the Eastern Mediterranean. Additionally, Biden reaffirmed support for Ireland's peace process and discussed trade and security issues. Concerning the Ukraine crisis, Biden pledged support for Ukrainian sovereignty and opposed projects like the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. He implemented sanctions against Russia and provided significant military aid to Ukraine following the Russian invasion. In terms of the UK, Biden's administration signaled caution regarding a new trade deal with post-Brexit Britain and emphasized climate change and NATO strengthening during visits. The New Atlantic Charter issues with the then Prime Minister Boris Johnson aim to address 21st century challenges while building on historical commitments. Biden also reaffirmed his commitment to peace in Northern Ireland during visits and discussions with UK leaders. Biden's Middle East strategy, dubbed Counterterrorism Plus, aims to address past discriminatory policies by engaging with the Arab American community leaders on surveillance, policing, and counterterrorism. His administration tightened controls on drone strikes and special force raids, reversing Trump-era policies to ensure greater oversight and transparency. In the caucus, Biden recognized the Armenian genocide, sparking tension with Turkey. His administration reaffirmed support for NATO membership for Georgia and urged fair treatment for former Georgia President Saakashvili. Regarding Iran, Biden criticized Trump's approach, offering to restart nuclear talks while maintaining sanctions until Iran seized uranium enrichment. Talks stalled over Iran's demands, including delisting the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist organization. In the Israel-Palestine conflict, Biden shifted to a more traditional approach, supporting a two-state solution and restoring diplomatic relations with the Palestinian Authority. He provided aid to Palestinians and reaffirmed support for Israel's security. In dealing with Saudi Arabia and Yemen, Biden halted arms sales, ended support for the Saudi offensive in Yemen, and engaged directly with King Salman, bypassing Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. He imposed a Khashoggi ban on Saudi officials implicated in Jamal Khashoggi's murder. Biden urged improvements in human rights in Bahrain and Egypt while adopting a cautious approach to Turkey due to its actions in Syria and the purchase of Russian missile systems. The information provided outlines the Biden administration's approach to China, Taiwan, and the South China Sea, as well as its interaction with other countries in the region. Here are the key points right here. China policy continuity. President Biden largely continued the China policies initiated by his predecessor, Donald Trump. He criticized China for its authoritarianism, trade violations, intellectual property theft, and unfair trade practices. Tariffs imposed by the Trump administration remained in place. Assertive stance on China. The Biden administration took a tough stance on China, rejecting its territorial claims in the South China Sea, condemning incursions into Taiwan's air defense zone, and advocating for transparency regarding the origins of COVID-19. The administration engaged in high-level talks with Chinese officials in Alaska, addressing issues such as human rights, cyber attacks, and regional aggression. The Biden administration reaffirmed its commitment to Taiwan's defense and condemned any potential Chinese attacks on the island. Taiwan's representative was invited to Biden's presidential inauguration, signaling a diplomatic gesture towards the island. The Biden administration rallied U.S. allies, including Japan and South Korea, to jointly criticize China's actions in the region. The Group of Seven, G7 nations, and NATO members issued strong statements condemning China's human rights abuses, military threats against Taiwan, and lack of transparency regarding COVID-19. The Biden administration strengthened bilateral relations with key allies such as Japan, reaffirming the U.S.-Japan security alliance and expanding trilateral cooperation with Japan and South Korea. The administration also deepened ties with Australia through initiatives like AUKUS, aimed at addressing regional security challenges. The Biden administration faced criticism for its handling of the withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan, particularly following the rapid collapse of the Afghan government and the Taliban's takeover of the country. The events in Afghanistan led to a decline in President Biden's approval ratings. Overall, the Biden administration pursued a robust and multilateral approach to address challenges posed by China's assertiveness in the Indo-Pacific region, while also deepening alliances and partnerships with key regional allies. A few more things. In May 2022, President engaged in a summit with ASEAN, emphasizing a shared vision for regional success. This marked a significant diplomatic event given the absence of U.S. presidents from such summits since 2017. The summit included 9 Asian ASEAN members, excluding Myanmar due to internal conflicts. Biden's focus was on promoting democracy and adhering to international rules. By October 2022, Biden announced the elevation of U.S.-Asian ASEAN relations to a comprehensive strategic partnership. During the U.S. and ASEAN summit in Phnom Penh, this signified a deepening of ties between the U.S. and those nations. Vice President Kamala Harris further strengthened relations in September 2023, announcing plans to establish the U.S. ASEAN Center in Washington, D.C. The center aims to enhance bilateral ties through various initiatives, including public-private partnerships and diplomatic engagements. Regarding Myanmar, Biden condemned the 2021 coup and called for the release of detained officials, advocating for respect for democratic processes. Sanctions were imposed against coup plotters, underscoring U.S. opposition to anti-democratic actions. In the Philippines, Biden met with President Bongbong Marcos, affirming the desire to strengthen bilateral relations. Efforts to counter increased military threats from China, including the opening of additional Philippine military bases for U.S. use, underlining mutual security interests. In sub-Saharan Africa, Biden's administration engaged in various diplomatic efforts. Notably, U.S. aid administrator Samantha Power aimed to prevent famine in Tigray, Ethiopia, and supported Sudan's transition to civilian democracy. On the multilateral front, Biden re-engaged with international organizations such as rejoining the United Nations Human Rights Council and the Paris Agreement on climate change. These actions signaled a departure from the isolationist policies of the previous administration. Overall, Biden's foreign policy initiative received mixed assessments, with some praising efforts in specific areas like global health and climate change, while others criticized perceiving shortcomings in addressing geopolitical challenges effectively. So that is all I got for Joe Biden and Donald Trump. And you can kind of see like which president not necessarily did more, but what their intent was with their foreign policies, right? Donald Trump obviously wanted to be be portrayed as a strong head when it comes to the United States, but also wanted to be much more of a at-home domestic type country and focusing on issues that happen domestically, kind of trying to break agreements with a lot of countries and kind of building relationships with countries like North Korea and Russia instead. Now, the thing that both Biden and Trump were in agreement with was how they were handling China in particular, with Trump obviously tariffing and breaking certain deals with China, and Joe Biden basically sticking to it. You could argue that when Trump did it, however, of course, that had major ramifications, and especially for farmers, but that's a conversation that I had more so in the economic episode. Joe Biden definitely took a more deliberate approach to a lot of these countries and building relationships. Obviously, he did a lot of things that you expected for more of a democratic viewpoint, in the sense of building democracy throughout the world and building its principles throughout the world, human rights, and making sure that multiple countries have proper human rights, and obviously things regarding climate change as well. So these things from the left's point of view and for a more hands-on point of view are positives. The big negatives from what I've seen when it comes to Biden is mostly due to the probably two most controversial conflicts that have gone on. And I guess the Afghanistan situation, of course, because the Taliban took over, even though it's such a lose-lose situation, considering so many people did not want us to be in Afghanistan in the first place. But taking that off the table, the big thing regarding Joe Biden is the situation regarding Russia, Ukraine, and Israel Palestine. It is a very contentious and very controversial issue as of right now. Donald Trump fortunately didn't have to deal with such conflicts. Now, was that due to COVID or his own merit? It's really hard to say because these situations were not caused by America, but it was caused by other entities. Russia deciding to invade Ukraine, would Donald Trump be able to stop him from doing that or broker some type of deal? Unsure. Or would he not get involved altogether? Because if you guys know, Donald Trump actually said that he would not be willing to help out a NATO nation that didn't pay their fair due. Ukraine is not even a NATO nation, so would he even help Ukraine at all, or would he just let Russia kind of do what they want to do? It's really hard to say, but I feel like you would have to more than likely argue that Trump wouldn't get involved at all when it comes to Ukraine. Then that leaves Israel Palestine. Now, Trump made Jerusalem not only the capital, but he put the embassy in Jerusalem as well. So it makes me think in the Israel Palestine conflict, he would have helped Israel. Now, how far would he have helped Israel? Would he have went all the way to officially eliminate Palestine? Or would he try to broker peace? It's hard to say. Trump, as of right now, from what I'm aware of, hasn't kind of indicated that he's one to be peacemaker necessarily. He's good at building ties with controversial figures, sure, with Kim Jong-un and Putin. But when it comes to a conflict such as that, what will Trump do when all the pressure is laid on him with it being such a controversial situation? So Joe Biden, when it comes to both situations, he decided to support Ukraine by giving them funding and, giving them certain resources and putting certain sanctions on Russia without getting directly involved. I think that is for me personally, a good approach, because I've always said that Russia expanding their influence, Russia basically setting a precedent that it's okay to invade another sovereign nation, or bad precedents, and we don't want their influence to grow, because obviously China wants to take over Taiwan, and we know this. Now, that one's going to be much harder because Taiwan we have a strong relationship with, and Taiwan is a NATO nation. So we didn't want Russia to kind of go further beyond. So that's why we helped Ukraine. We wanted to stop it. We wanted to nip in the bud. It's not a morality thing, more of a understanding international influence thing, if that makes sense to you, right? Now, the question now is Russia's not really getting anywhere. Ukraine is not going to be able to get all the territory back. Now it's time to step in as the kind of country that everybody look towards and say, okay, time to broker peace. Ukraine, you're not getting those areas back from Russia. Russia, you're not going to win this conflict. At this point, you've lost too much. You can have this. This is a Russian territory. Ukraine, keep what you have, become a sovereign nation, and really start establishing your own legitimacy under democracy. And then let's move on from that. That is probably the best course scenario, but Biden is not really taking that step forward. And that's something you probably could criticize Joe Biden for. As for the Israel-Palestine situation, it's much more complicated, right? Obviously, we are allies with Israel. Israel has been our allies for a very, very long time. Palestine and Israel have a complicated relationship throughout the history. Whatever you want to say in terms of occupation, or whatever you want to say in terms of Israel winning the prior big conflict and how they're treating the Palestinians there, one thing we know is that things set off when Hamas and the Palestinians was it October 7th? Like a huge disaster. for Israel, and they wanted to nip Hamas in the bud for good. And Hamas had a saying that they wanted to get rid of all the Israelis and the Jewish people. So a big war broke out, right? Where's U.S.'s involvement? Because this is our ally. We have to help them. We're not allied with Palestine. And at some point, it seems like Israel is very much in control. And at this point in time, I'm making this episode on March 4th, 2024. At this point, Israel has all the leverage to end the war. Now, it seems like Israel doesn't want a two-state solution, and it seems like the Palestinians initially didn't want a two-state solution. And you can argue at this point, Netanyahu might be going a little bit too far considering the massacre that just took place. So maybe it's a time for America to get involved and say, yo, we need to broker peace. We need a ceasefire. All the hostages need to be returned. And we need to give some aid to these struggling Palestinian civilians. And America's actually doing that. They're giving aid to the Gaza Palestinian civilians. Yes, there is terrible actors in Gaza with Hamas and some of the IDF and Israel leaders, the far right wingers, of course. But this is another conflict that should end. And does America have the power to potentially end it for both the Russia-Ukraine situation and Israel-Palestine? Again, you could argue yes. But I feel like the biggest deterrent from what I've seen is America getting involved in the first place. Like, we have to get involved with Israel. That's a no-brainer. And as for Ukraine, we understand we don't want Russia to gain more power and we don't want China to get any ideas. So when you really think about it, the idea of being isolationist is a dumb idea in the first place, in my opinion, because we're the most influential and the most powerful country in the world. We are the standard that a lot of these countries look at for a democratic nation. It's a terrible idea if we don't get involved. And if we're not leading the helm, then who would, right? Would you want a Russia-led kind of UN or China-led UN where we're getting led by Russia and China's example? Of course not. You don't want a system like that. You want a more free democratic system like America has, regardless of how good you think it is. I think it's the best governmental system in the nation, considering all our melting pot of people and the different ideals and the freedoms we have. It's done very well, all things considered, right? So ultimately, when I look at what Trump and Biden has done, the big thing for me is like, it really depends on what you value. For me, I think we need to be a nation of influence, of impact. We need to be the nation that everybody looks towards. So I would value Joe Biden's approach to foreign policies over Donald Trump, which seems to be more isolationist. Could you argue that Trump trying to broker ties between Kim Jong-un and Putin were good things, trying to break ties with or bridge ties with your enemies? I mean, it depends on how those conversations were really going, because it's not like anything changed after those conversations. Nothing really changed. Like, there was no drastic difference with how both countries treated each other. So other than being friendly as the figurehead of America to another figurehead, I'm not really moved by that. So that's why I would favor Joe Biden and what he's done for his foreign policy over Donald Trump. So for me, from what I've seen, I think Joe Biden did a better job when it comes to the economy, and I think he did a better job when it comes to his foreign policy. We might go education or another area for the next podcast episode next Monday, but feel free to let me know what you guys think about the situation. Of course, I appreciate everybody who listened. Rate it 5 stars if you did, so we can grow the podcast. And if you want to come on my podcast and actually have a back and forth conversation, that is what my podcast is for. I'm not trying to convince you. I'm trying to bridge the gap between our ideological differences. Now, I'm not even a Democrat. I'm not a leftist or any of that. I'm just going by what makes sense to me and my value system. And that should be the most important thing right here. Don't let Donald Trump, don't let Joe Biden just manipulate you to vote red or blue. Think about what you care about, what your community cares about, what you and your family cares about. what is your value system, and choose wisely based on that. That should be the most important. And my platform is a platform that is supposed to allow the opportunity to have those conversations and create those solutions through compromise. This is not a podcast episode where a solution is going to be made. It's more of an opinionated one based off the different criteria, of course. But if you want to have that conversation with me, feel free to go to my website, send me an email, and let me know that, hey, I want to talk to you about Donald Trump and Joe Biden's foreign policy. And I'm here for it. I'm here for it. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Y'all have a good one. Take care. And make sure you enjoy this final promotion.
Well, check it out, y'all. We got what you need. We're all living in apartments, condos, vans. Well, dude, even you can have a studio in a box. Yes, we can help you with that right here at Blind Knowledge. We work on your budget, and we figure out your measurements. We'll get you the best sound for the best price. Let me know, 877-237-1143 or at blindknowledge.com. Yep.